A battle-worn Marine thought he was only buying silence when he moved into a forgotten house at the edge of Appalachia. But in the damp basement shadows, he found more than peeling walls and broken chains. There lay a blind German shepherd, her ribs sharp beneath her fur, a white scarf tied across eyes that no longer saw the world, yet still carried its memory. Justice was her name. What Jack didn't know was that this dog was not just a survivor. She was the key to uncovering a trail of vanished volunteers, a hidden crime, and a new beginning no one expected. What happened next will restore your faith in mercy and remind you that sometimes God's miracles arrive scarred, silent, and still willing to guide us home. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Let's see how far Justice's story can reach. The Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky held a kind of silence that was not simply quiet but heavy, as if the mountains themselves carried old secrets in their ridges. In late autumn, when the wind rolled down the hollows and rattled through bare oak branches, the small town of Willow Creek seemed like a place where time slowed, a forgotten dot on the map. On that afternoon, gray clouds hung low, pressing the sky down against the town, and a drizzle left the cracked asphalt shining as if it had been freshly varnished. Willow Creek had never been a prosperous place. Coal had once been king here, but the mines had long since closed, leaving behind rusted equipment and weary people. The streets were lined with sagging porches and hand-painted signs, their paint faded, but not their stubbornness. Into this town, a man named Jack Turner arrived with the quiet air of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. Jack Turner was 38 years old, broad-shouldered and weathered from years of service as a U.S. Marine. His hair, once a deep walnut brown, now bore streaks of gray that seemed prematurely etched by war and loss. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, not the bright kind that sparkled with warmth, but the muted shade of storm clouds, always half-guarded, as though he carried unspoken memories. He was tall, 6 feet even, and though his build still showed the muscle of a soldier, it had thinned around the edges, like a man who no longer cared to keep fighting. Jack wore a leather jacket worn soft with age, a dark flannel shirt tucked into faded jeans, and scuffed brown boots that told stories of long marches. He had left behind a life in uniform, not because he had wanted to, but because peace had become a necessity rather than a luxury. A failed marriage, a few too many empty bottles, and nights filled with echoes of gunfire had pushed him to seek solitude. Willow Creek, with its forgotten houses and quiet streets, seemed like the place where he could disappear. He had purchased a house at the very edge of town, where the gravel road crumbled into weeds and the forest pressed close, as if reclaiming what was once taken. The property had been abandoned for over a decade, sold for a token price at a county auction. Locals called it unlucky, whispered that misfortune clung to its walls. Jack ignored them. To him, a roof was a roof, and the silence of an old house was still better than the noise that haunted his sleep. As he parked his battered Ford truck in the rutted driveway, the first thing he noticed was the sagging porch, leaning as though one more storm would send it toppling. Ivy crept up broken window frames, and the roof dipped dangerously in the center. Yet, something about its isolation spoke to him. Inside, the house smelled of dust and abandonment. The air was cool and damp, heavy with mildew. Cobwebs draped corners like forgotten lace, and floorboards groaned under his boots. He dropped his duffel bag in the front hall and moved slowly from room to room, taking in the skeletal remains of a life once lived, an overturned rocking chair, a fireplace thick with soot, wallpaper peeling like old skin. It was not welcoming, but it was his now, and for Jack that was enough. He was about to climb the stairs when a faint sound broke the stillness. At first he thought it was the wind rattling loose shutters, but then he heard it again, softer, almost a whimper. He turned toward the basement door, half hidden beneath the staircase. The handle was cold under his palm, and the hinges screamed when he pulled it open. A stale gust of air rushed out, carrying with it the sour scent of earth and rust. Jack retrieved a flashlight from his duffel and descended carefully. The stairs were steep and uneven, boards swollen with damp. The basement was unfinished, a dirt floor stretching beneath exposed beams. Shadows pooled thick in the corners, broken only by the narrow beam of his light. Old crates sagged in one corner, and a rusted water heater hunched in another. But at the far wall, something moved. At first, Jack thought it was a pile of discarded rags. Then the rags shifted, and two pale eyes reflected the beam back at him. He froze. Slowly, the shape resolved into a dog. No, the fragile shell of one. The animal was a German shepherd, or what remained of one. Her body was skeletal, ribs jutting like prison bars beneath a coat gone dull and patchy. Scars lined her flank, some old, some raw. She trembled as she tried to stand, hind legs shaking violently before giving out. What struck Jack most, however, was the cloth tied gently across her eyes. A faded strip of white fabric, as if someone had once tried to shield her from the world she could no longer see. The dog was blind. And yet, she did not snarl or bark. She lay still, silent, watching him with those pale, unseeing eyes, her head tilting faintly as if recognizing something deeper than sight. Jack crouched slowly, his movements deliberate. "Easy," he murmured, his voice rasping but soft. He had learned to approach broken creatures with patience, whether men or animals. He set the flashlight on the ground so the beam spilled wide, freeing his hands. The dog, though ragged, seemed older, perhaps 10 years, her muzzle silvered with age. The scarf around her head gave her a strange dignity, like a wounded soldier still standing tall despite the ruin of battle. Her breathing was shallow, but when Jack extended a hand, she did not recoil. Something stirred in him then, a memory of cradling wounded Marines under fire, of speaking calm words to boys whose eyes held terror. He slipped off his jacket, wrapping it around the trembling form. The dog was light, frighteningly so. When he lifted her, he felt each bone beneath her skin pressing against his arms. She did not resist. She simply surrendered, her head lowering against his chest, as though she had been waiting for him all along. Jack carried her carefully up, the stairs, each step creaking beneath his weight, until they emerged into the dim light of the hallway. Outside, the drizzle had thickened into rain, tapping steadily against the roof. Jack set the dog gently in the cab of his truck, turning the heater on high. He sat in silence for a moment, his hand resting against the animal's thin frame, feeling the faint rise and fall of her breath. For reasons he could not explain, he whispered, "Justice. That's your name." The word hung in the air, solid, final. The dog did not react, yet somehow it fit. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Willow Creek, another figure had taken notice of Jack's arrival. Emily Carter sat at the corner booth of the only diner still open past twilight, her notebook open in front of her, and a half-empty coffee cooling by her elbow. Emily was 34, slender, with sharp cheekbones and a determined mouth that rarely curved into smiles. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, practical rather than stylish, and wire-frame glasses magnified eyes that missed very little. She dressed simply, jeans, boots, and a checkered flannel shirt, but carried herself with the restless energy of someone who had long ago learned that the world rarely offered answers unless you hunted them down. Emily had grown up in Willow Creek, the daughter of a coal miner and a school teacher, but she had left for college and returned as a journalist for a regional paper. She had a reputation for digging where others preferred silence. A car accident in her early 20s had left a thin scar across her temple and a permanent reminder of how fragile life could be. Since then, she had thrown herself into stories that mattered, exposing corruption, defending those without voices. For the last year, she had been chasing whispers of an underground network that trafficked dogs through the Appalachian corridor. Too many shelters had closed mysteriously. Too many strays had vanished without explanation. When she heard that a stranger had bought the Kane house, the one locals still called cursed, her instincts flared. The house had a history tied to rumors of missing animals. Now, a former Marine was moving in, the kind of man who didn't look like he had come here for company. Emily scribbled a note in her pad. Jack Turner, Kane property, possible lead. She sipped her coffee, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. That night, as rain swept down the mountain and rattled tin roofs, two lives quietly intersected. Jack, who had come seeking silence, and Emily, who sought truth. Neither yet knew that the emaciated blind dog wrapped in Jack's jacket, with her white scarf hiding ruined eyes, would be the thread binding them to a story larger than either imagined. For now, Jack only knew that he had brought justice out of the shadows, and Emily only knew that the Kane house breathed with secrets once more. The rain of the previous night had given way to a heavy mist that clung to the trees like smoke. Willow Creek always looked weary under clouded skies, but on this morning, the town seemed more ghostly than usual. Jack Turner awoke on the creaking couch of his new house, the faint hum of the heater filling the silence. Justice lay curled beside him, her thin body wrapped in an old quilt Jack had found upstairs. Though blind, she seemed to stir at every sound, her ears twitching, her nose lifting slightly when Jack moved. He reached down, brushing her fur. It was coarse and patchy, but warmer than it had been the night before. Jack was no stranger to caring for the broken. He boiled chicken in a dented pot, shredding it into soft strips and mixing it with water before offering it to the dog. Justice sniffed first, then ate with quiet urgency, pausing often as if unsure whether the food was truly hers. Jack watched, his chest tightening with something unfamiliar, responsibility that felt more personal than orders ever had. He whispered, "You're safe now," though the words sounded fragile even to his own ears. Later that day, Jack explored the house further. The second floor held only dust and forgotten furniture, but the main hallway near the back carried signs that disturbed him. Rusty rings bolted into the wall, long grooves in the wooden floor, as though something had been chained and struggled to break free. In a narrow storage closet, he uncovered a metal cage, its bars bent and rusted. It was too small for a grown dog, yet the claw marks inside told him it had once held life. Beneath a loose floorboard near the cage, Jack discovered a photograph. A young woman, no older than her mid-20s, kneeling in the grass with a German shepherd that looked eerily like Justice, except younger and strong. The woman's hair was chestnut brown, long and windswept, her smile broad and luminous. On the back, faded ink read, "Hannah Brooks and Gracie, Summer Picnic." Jack stared at the name. Whoever Hannah Brooks had been, she had once loved this dog. Justice, hearing the crinkle of the photograph, lifted her head. Though her eyes were covered by the white scarf, she whined softly, her ears folding back. Jack crouched beside her, holding the photo near. "Is this you?" he murmured. He couldn't be certain, but something in the way the dog's body stiffened suggested memory, perhaps even recognition. That afternoon, Jack stepped onto the porch with Justice beside him. The mist had thickened into fog that rolled through the forest beyond the property. The dog stood still for a long moment, nose raised, her body taut, as though listening to voices only she could hear. Then, without warning, she turned toward the woods, pulling against the improvised leash Jack had fashioned from a length of rope. She moved slowly but deliberately, paws pressing into the damp earth. Jack followed, boots sinking into the mud. The woods behind the house were dense pine and oak standing close together. Birds were silent, and the fog muffled sounds so completely that Jack could hear only his own breathing. Justice stopped near a cluster of rocks, circling before pressing her nose to the ground. Jack crouched, brushing aside wet leaves, and his hand closed on something metallic. He pulled up a chain, rusted, its end broken jagged. His stomach tightened. This was no ordinary yard. Something cruel had happened here, and Justice remembered it, even if she could not see. As Jack coiled the chain in his hand, a voice carried faintly through the fog. "You found something, didn't you?" He spun, his hand instinctively brushing the knife at his belt. From between the trees emerged a woman, tall and slender, wearing jeans tucked into worn boots, a thick flannel shirt, and a raincoat half-zipped. Her blonde hair was tied back, her glasses fogged slightly. She raised her hands, not in fear, but to show she carried nothing more threatening than a leather satchel and a notebook. "Name's Emily Carter," she said, her voice brisk but not unfriendly. "Reporter. I didn't mean to sneak up on you, but I've been waiting for a chance to talk." Jack studied her. She appeared in her mid-30s, sharp-featured, her eyes bright with restless intelligence. There was something guarded about her stance, like a woman used to suspicion, but beneath it burned determination. Emily stepped closer, her boots crunching damp leaves. "You're Jack Turner, right? The Marine who bought the Kane property." When Jack didn't answer, she went on. "I've been following cases around here, dogs disappearing, volunteers vanishing when they got too close. And now I hear you've already found something in that basement." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't like being watched, but Justice shifted beside him, sniffing toward Emily before settling again. The dog's instinct calmed him slightly. "What do you know about this place?" he asked. Emily opened her satchel, pulling out a folder thick with papers. She spread a few photographs across a flat rock. Grainy images of rundown shelters, kennels with rusted bars, reports of missing women. 3 names circled in red. "These aren't coincidences," Emily said firmly. "Hannah Brooks, Linda Moore, Jessica Dean, all animal volunteers. All disappeared after chasing rumors of a man named Richard Hale and his so-called rescue operations. Every trail points back to Willow Creek, and specifically to this house." She paused, her expression hardening. "And then I hear about a blind German shepherd found in your basement. That dog is no stray, Mr. Turner. She's a witness." Jack looked down at Justice, who now sat at his boots, ears twitching, though her eyes could see nothing. The scarf across her face gave her a strange majesty, as though she carried wisdom carved from suffering. "Her name's Justice," Jack said quietly. "She's been through hell." Emily's gaze softened, just slightly. "Then she might be the key to proving what happened here. Dogs don't forget smells, sounds, places. Even blind, she could lead us back to something the rest of us have missed." Jack exhaled slowly, the weight of the photograph in his pocket pressing against him. He thought of Hannah Brooks, her smile frozen in sunlight, beside a younger version of this same dog. He thought of the chain buried in the soil, of the cage upstairs. He had come here seeking peace, but now it seemed fate had dragged him into someone else's unfinished story. Justice shifted again, turning her head toward the forest with quiet insistence. Jack followed her gaze into the fog. Somewhere beyond those trees, echoes stirred, whispers of chains, cages, and lives stolen. He had tried to escape battles, but perhaps some battles found you no matter how far you ran. Emily tucked her folder away, her tone brisk once more. "I know you didn't come here looking for trouble, Mr. Turner, but if you really care about that dog, you'll help me uncover what's been buried. People have already died chasing this. If we don't finish it, more will." Jack said nothing, but his hand dropped to rest on Justice's head. The dog lifted her muzzle, unseeing, as if affirming the choice before him. Silence fell again, broken only by the distant drip of rain from branches. The woods around Willow Creek were no longer empty. They were alive with secrets, and Justice was determined to lead them deeper. The storm rolled in with a violence that seemed personal, as if the mountains themselves had grown restless. Rain hammered the roof of the cane house, thunder rattled the windows, and the wind howled through cracks like a chorus of ghosts. Jack Turner stood at the back door, watching the downpour blur the world into gray streaks. Beside him, Justice shifted uneasily. The blind German shepherd's white scarf was damp from the leaking roof, and though her sightless eyes could not see the storm, her trembling ears caught every crash of thunder. She pressed her nose to the ground, pacing in circles until, with sudden insistence, she scratched at the floorboards, then bolted toward the yard. Jack cursed softly, pulling on his boots and jacket before following. The rain struck like nails as he stumbled across the yard. Justice stopped at the base of an ancient oak, its twisted limbs clawing at the sky. She dug furiously at the mud, paws spraying clumps of wet earth. Jack dropped to his knees, shoving mud aside until his fingers struck something hard and metallic. He dug deeper, pulling free a rusted metal box, heavy despite its size. With effort, he pried it open. Inside, wrapped in layers of rotting cloth, were plastic sleeves of documents. He lifted one under the beam of his flashlight. Rows of microchip numbers beside photographs of gaunt, bleeding dogs, their eyes hollow with suffering. At the bottom lay a single glossy picture of a tall man in a charcoal suit, bald, clean-shaven, his expression smug. Typed in block letters beneath, Richard Hale. The name sent a chill through Jack. He had heard it from Emily just the day before, a shadowy figure behind vanishing volunteers and false rescues. Now, Hale's face stared up from the mud, as if daring him to deny it. Back inside, dripping rain across the floor, Jack carried the box into the basement. Justice padded behind him, her head lowered, tail rigid. The storm groaned through the beams above as Jack swept his flashlight across the dirt floor. He retraced the space where he had first found her. Something about the back wall seemed wrong. The boards didn't match the rest. Newer nails, smoother wood. Jack raised a crowbar he'd found earlier and pried. The planks gave way reluctantly, falling aside with a hollow crack. Behind them stood a steel door, its surface mottled with rust, its handle stiff but not locked. Jack hesitated. The storm outside roared louder, as if demanding he choose. With a grunt, he shoved the door until it screeched open, releasing a stench of mildew and something older, metallic. His flashlight cut through the dark. The room was narrow, barely 12 feet across, its walls concrete. Along one side stood a row of cages, each no larger than a cupboard, their bars bent inward from desperate attempts to escape. Rusted chains dangled like vines, some ending in collars too small for comfort. Scratches raked across the walls, deep gouges climbing nearly 5 feet high. Jack swallowed hard. Justice stepped to the threshold, her body trembling. She lowered her head, emitting a whimper so raw it cut through Jack's chest. Though she could not see, she knew this place. She had lived it. Her paws froze, and she would not enter. Jack crouched, resting a hand on her back. "It's over," he whispered, though the words felt brittle in the thick air. He swept the beam across the cages again, and his jaw tightened. Whoever had built this room hadn't just confined animals, they had tortured them. Meanwhile, across town, Emily Carter was hunched over her laptop, in the corner of her small apartment above the bookstore. The storm rattled the shutters, but Emily barely noticed. Her desk was littered with bank statements, receipts, and scribbled notes. She had traced wire transfers from a nonprofit called North Valley Rescue, a supposed shelter organization. But every number ended in accounts registered under shell companies, all routing back to Hale's name. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion tugging at her sharp features. Emily wasn't alone in her work. She had been exchanging encrypted emails with an old colleague, Daniel Reeves, an investigative journalist from Lexington. Daniel was in his early 40s, lean, with a thinning hairline, and a reputation for chasing dangerous leads too far. Years ago, he had been beaten while covering a corruption story, leaving a scar down his jaw that never quite healed. Since then, he had carried both a deep cynicism and an unshakable loyalty to those who dared expose the truth. Tonight, Emily typed quickly, "I've confirmed Hale is funneling money through North Valley Rescue, false shelters, disappearing volunteers. I think Turner's house was a holding site, found connections to missing women." She hesitated, then added, "Phone may be tapped. Be careful." She hit send, then sat back, listening. The storm outside muffled most noise, but for a moment she thought she heard a click, faint and deliberate, on the phone line by her bed. She swallowed. Someone was listening. She snapped the laptop shut, her pulse quickening. Back in the Kane house, Jack examined the documents again under the dim bulb he had strung in the basement. Each page told a story of cruelty. Inventory lists labeled with numbers instead of names, photographs of cages filled with snarling, terrified dogs, red ink slashes through certain entries. His military training made him catalog the evidence, methodical, but his humanity made his stomach knot. He set the files back in the box, covering them with a tarp. Justice curled near the basement stairs, refusing to go further. Jack sat beside her, resting his back against the cold wall. "What did they do to you here?" he muttered. His storm-gray eyes stared into the sealed room, lit by the wavering beam of his flashlight. He thought of Emily's determination, of the photograph of Hannah Brooks, of the names written in red. He thought of Hale, clean-suited, and, smiling, untouched by the horror he commanded. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the basement in a sudden white flash. Jack inhaled sharply, resolve hardening. Whatever this was, he was part of it now. Justice had led him here for a reason, and Emily was right. Dogs didn't forget. Together, they would follow the trail until it ended, no matter how dark. Above ground, the storm raged on. But beneath the Kane house, the silence of the sealed room whispered louder than thunder. The storm had passed, but the land carried its memory in the form of soaked earth and branches scattered like bones. A gray morning mist coiled along the ridges outside Willow Creek, and the Kane house looked even more forlorn than usual, its sagging roof dripping with last night's rain. Inside, Jack Turner packed deliberately. A flashlight, extra batteries, his old combat knife, a length of rope, and a revolver he hadn't touched since leaving Denver. Justice sat nearby, her ears pricked forward, her white scarf freshly tied by Jack to replace the damp one. Though blind, the German shepherd's posture was sharp with intent, her nose twitching at the faint scents seeping from the documents Jack had uncovered. She remembered. Emily Carter arrived just after dawn, her hair damp from the mist, her notebook tucked under one arm, and a worn leather satchel hanging from her shoulder. She wore a dark green jacket cinched at the waist, jeans and boots still muddy from the night before. Her expression was tight, the kind of seriousness that came from too many nights staring at missing persons reports. "We need to move quickly," she said, voice clipped. "The files you found mention coordinates tied to North Valley Rescue. It's less than 10 miles out, near an abandoned mill road." Jack regarded her silently for a moment. He noticed the exhaustion around her eyes, the kind of fatigue that came not just from work, but from carrying grief that never left. He nodded once. "Then let's finish this." They drove in Jack's battered pickup. Justice curled on the seat between them. The dog was restless, shifting constantly, nose pressed to the cracked window, as if urging them onward. The road wound deep into the Appalachian forest, the mist growing denser until trees loomed like sentinels on either side. After nearly an hour, Emily pointed ahead. There. A chain-link fence half collapsed around what had once been a rescue facility. A faded sign barely clung to its post, North Valley Rescue, temporarily closed. The letters were sun-bleached, the logo of a paw print chipped and peeling. The main building was a warehouse-style structure, its windows boarded, its roof patched in places with mismatched tin sheets. Rust streaked down the walls like dried blood. Jack parked at a distance and surveyed. His instincts kicked in. The silence was too perfect. No birds, no movement. He motioned Emily to stay close. Justice leapt down beside him, tail low but body tense. She sniffed the air, then pulled toward the fence, determined. Inside the compound, the warehouse was a labyrinth of corridors lined with cages. Some were empty, their doors hanging open. Others contained old bedding and rusted bowls. The air reeked of disinfectant masking something fouler. Jack's flashlight cut through the gloom, beams glinting off steel bars and claw marks gouged into the floors. Suddenly, Justice stiffened. Her ears rotated sharply toward the left. Passage. She tugged the rope leash with surprising force, guiding Jack and Emily deeper into the warehouse. Her paws clicked against the concrete, unerring despite her blindness. At the end of the corridor stood a locked steel door. Jack shoved his shoulder against it until it gave with a groan. Inside, two women sat on narrow cots, their bodies frail and eyes wide with shock at the intrusion. One, with chestnut hair tangled around her shoulders and a familiar smile faded by exhaustion, was Hannah Brooks. Her once bright eyes were sunken, but still carried a glint of recognition when she saw Justice. The dog whined, tail thrashing weakly, before stumbling forward to bury her nose against Hannah's hands. Hannah gasped, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. Beside her was another woman, lean and tall, her auburn hair streaked with gray. She had sharp cheekbones and wore torn scrubs that hinted she had once worked in a clinic. Linda Moore. Her face bore lines carved by both hardship and determination, but her gaze was steady, even in captivity. "You're not with them," she said hoarsely. Jack shook his head. "We're here to get you out." Emily was already pulling out her camera, documenting every cage, every scratch on the walls, every desperate expression. She kept her voice calm as she spoke to the women, asking names, dates, what they remembered. Hannah spoke in broken sentences, describing how she had been lured here under the promise of helping strays, only to be locked in. Linda added bitterly that they had been forced to clean wounds, feed dogs, keep them alive just long enough to be sold, or worse. Jack cut the rope from the cots, helping them to their feet. Justice stayed pressed against Hannah's side, guiding her steps. Together, they made their way back through the corridors. But as they neared the exit, a noise cut through the silence. the distant slam of a door, followed by footsteps. Emily's heart lurched. She pressed the camera against her chest, whispering, "They're back." Jack pulled the women behind him, his hand on the revolver. Justice froze, ears pricked, nose twitching furiously. She growled low, pointing them toward a side passage. They hurried through the maze, but shadows moved behind them. Emily risked one glance back and saw a figure, broad-shouldered and moving fast, a length of pipe in his hand. She broke into a run, clutching the camera. The warehouse opened onto a back loading bay, its doors chained but the wood panels weak with rot. Jack smashed through with his shoulder, splinters flying. They spilled into the yard, the mist still thick. But the footsteps thundered behind. Emily lagged for just a moment, fumbling with her satchel. The attacker lunged from the shadows, swinging the pipe. In the blur of panic, Emily froze. But Justice, guided only by her ears, launched sideways, colliding with her body and dragging her down. The pipe whistled inches above, striking the wall instead. Justice snarled, clamping her jaws on the man's sleeve. The attacker cursed, stumbling backward. Jack fired a warning shot into the ground, and the man bolted into the trees. Breathless, Emily clutched Justice, stroking her fur. "You saved me," she whispered. The blind dog only panted, ears still flicking to catch every sound. Jack herded them all into the truck, helping Hannah and Linda into the back seat. Emily sat in front, trembling, but refusing to let go of her camera. Justice settled once more at Hannah's feet, her body pressed close like a shield. As the truck rumbled away from North Valley Rescue, Emily whispered, "We have the footage. We have the witnesses. Hale won't be able to bury this." Jack kept his eyes on the road, jaw tight. "Let's hope you're right, because after tonight, he'll know we're coming." The mist swallowed the compound behind them, leaving it silent once more. But this time, the silence was no longer victory for Hale. It was a promise that the truth had been set loose. The courthouse of Willow Creek had never seen such a crowd. Its sandstone steps, usually deserted except for a few clerks or townsfolk paying fines, were now lined with reporters holding cameras, townspeople clutching handmade signs, and lawyers hurrying with case files pressed against their chests. The morning air was cool, the sky washed in pale gold, but the mood was thick with anticipation. The trial of Richard Hale had become more than a legal proceeding. It was the reckoning of a community that had been living under shadows it never dared name. Inside, Jack Turner stood tall in the hallway, dressed not in his worn jacket and jeans, but in a dark suit borrowed from a neighbor, its shoulders slightly too narrow for his broad frame. His hair, brown streaked with silver, was combed back, his storm-gray eyes calm but alert. Beside him, Emily Carter adjusted the strap of her leather satchel, notebook in hand. She wore a tailored navy dress beneath her coat, her auburn hair pinned neatly, though loose strands framed her face. Her expression was steady, though her fingers tapped nervously against her notebook. Justice walked between them, her white scarf bright against her sable coat. Though blind, she moved with dignity, her head held high, guided by the leash loosely in Jack's hand. The hush that spread as she entered the courtroom was unlike anything Jack had ever experienced, not even in war zones. People leaned forward, whispers fading into silence as the dog who had survived the cages and uncovered the truth took her place at the front. On the opposite bench, Richard Hale sat, sharp in a tailored charcoal suit, his bald head gleaming under the courtroom lights. His blue eyes, cold and practiced, scanned the room with disdain. But when his gaze fell on Justice, he faltered. Just a fraction, but enough for those watching closely to notice. He shifted in his seat, jaw tightening, as if her unseeing eyes pierced through the armor of his arrogance. Judge Evelyn Drake presided over the trial. A woman in her 60s with silver hair, pulled into a severe bun and spectacles perched at the edge of her nose, she carried herself with a sharpness honed over decades of holding liars accountable. Known in legal circles as uncompromising yet fair, she had grown up in Willow Creek herself, daughter of a coal miner, and carried the weight of justice like a mantle she refused to shed. The prosecution began with the documents Jack had unearthed from the iron box. Rows of microchip IDs, photographs of dogs scarred and emaciated, and financial ledgers tying North Valley Rescue directly to Hale. Each piece was projected on the courtroom screen, every image drawing gasps from the gallery. Then came the witnesses. Hannah Brooks, thinner now, but stronger than when she had been found, took the stand first. Her chestnut hair was tied back, and though her voice wavered at the start, her conviction grew as she spoke. She described how she had been lured by the promise of working with rescue dogs, only to be imprisoned and forced to tend to animals that were abused for profit. When asked about justice, her voice broke, but she smiled. She never gave up. She found her way home, and she brought us with her. Linda Moore followed, taller, sterner, her auburn hair streaked with gray fell loosely across her shoulders. Her eyes burned with anger as she testified, recounting how she had been made to treat dogs like livestock, their value determined only by breeding potential or fighting endurance. Her words cut sharply. Hale said pain was profit. I say his profit was built on chains and screams. Throughout their testimonies, Hale's lawyers tried to object, to discredit, but Judge Drake cut them down with a gavel and icy stare. The evidence was too strong, the voices too clear. At last, Emily was called. She carried her notebook like a shield, her calm reporter's demeanor belying the storm inside her. She confirmed the financial trail, showing her investigative notes and encrypted messages with Daniel Reeves, who had risked much to verify the leads. She did not embellish, but her quiet passion lent weight. The truth, she told the jury, was buried under lies, but it clawed its way free, and now it asks to be heard. Then came the moment that silenced even the defense. At the request of the prosecution, Jack walked forward with justice. He guided her gently to the space before Hale. She sat, head lifted, her blind eyes hidden behind the white scarf, her body calm. No bark, no growl, only presence. Hale shifted again, his smirk faltering. The silence stretched until Judge Drake herself noted, "Let the record show the witness, though unable to speak, has delivered her testimony." The jury took less than 4 hours. When the foreman rose and spoke the words, "Guilty on all counts," the room erupted. Applause, tears, sighs of relief. Hale sat rigid, his face pale, as if the walls of power he had built crumbled in an instant. In the days that followed, Emily's series of investigative articles went national. Photographs of Justice sitting nobly beside Jack filled newspapers, her story sparking outrage and hope in equal measure. Donations poured into Willow Creek. And then, the Kane House, once a ruin haunted by secrets, began its transformation. Volunteers came with paint, lumber, and tools. Carpets of daisies and marigolds were planted along the walkway. Rooms once thick with dust and cobwebs were scrubbed clean, repurposed into kennels lined with soft bedding. Shelves were filled with food and medical supplies. Murals painted by local children brightened the walls. They named it Justice Haven. At the ribbon cutting, Emily stood on a small stage with Jack at her side. Hannah and Linda were there too, healthier now, determination in their eyes. Hannah, dressed in denim overalls and a white blouse smudged with paw prints, had already taken to training the dogs with gentle patience. Linda, taller and brisk in her movements, organized schedules with the precision of someone who refused to waste a second of her new freedom. The townsfolk gathered, clapping as Emily spoke into the microphone. "Heroes don't always wear uniforms," she said, voice catching. "Sometimes they walk on 4 legs, scarred but unbroken, and teach us that hope survives, even in darkness." Justice lay on the fresh sod in the center of the yard, her 6 puppies tumbling over one another. Her bent ear flicked lazily as she rested, the white scarf freshly tied. She didn't need to see to know she was home. Later that evening, when the visitors left and lanterns glowed softly on the porch, Jack sat on the steps with a mug of coffee. Emily sat beside him, flipping through her notebook, though for once she didn't write. Hannah's laughter carried from inside, Linda's voice firm as she instructed a group of volunteers. The puppies yipped as they played, their sounds weaving into the night like a hymn. Jack reached down to scratch behind Justice's ear. "We did it," he murmured. Justice thumped her tail against the boards. She didn't need words. Her very presence was enough. The house that had once been a tomb for secrets was now a sanctuary for the voiceless, and in its heart lay a blind German shepherd whose scars had become symbols, whose silence spoke louder than any voice. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come with thunder from the sky or angels singing above. They come quietly, on 4 tired legs, with a bent ear and scars that speak of survival. Justice was not only a dog, she was a reminder that God often chooses the broken, the overlooked, and the abandoned to reveal His grace. In our daily lives, we may not all rescue a forgotten house or uncover hidden crimes, but we can listen, we can care, and we can open our doors to those who need a safe place. That is how miracles begin, one small act of kindness at a time. If this story touched your heart, let it be more than just a story. Share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment to remind others that God still works through His creatures. Type Amen below if you believe He still sends us signs wrapped in fur, silence, and loyalty. Do not forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, redemption, and second chances. May the Lord bless you and your family, and may He continue to send miracles into your life, just as He sent justice into Jack's.